This is a little bit of my coming into the finance world is a little bit of a new thing for me. I spent most of my career in doing mathematics, written papers on pi, and when I'm not doing that, I've been doing high-performance scientific computing. I worked many years at NASA, and then after that at the Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory. And right from the beginning of my career, though, I like when I finished my PhD here at Stanford, I knew some people who were, some other mathematicians who were going into the finance world. And I sort of learned in general terms and in some specifics the sort of techniques that they were using. And I was, became aware, boy, some of that's pretty sophisticated, some very, very sophisticated time series analysis, and hidden Markov models, quite a number of very sophisticated techniques. And some of these persons that I knew later went on, and at least one founded a hedge fund that's now one of the most successful hedge funds of all time. Made himself many billions of dollars. So I myself didn't get involved much in finance, though, until maybe like about 10 years ago. Anyway, I'll tell you more of the story in a minute here. First of all, I'd like to just mention briefly this let's see, Neil and Emma and Peter all mentioned this AlphaGo program. There's actually been just a new development of that just in the last week or two. The earlier versions of AlphaGo were trained using both human input and then the computer playing a lot of games against itself. A lot of huge library of Go games that were available in the public domain were used as input. This is the program which surprised everybody last year by beating this Korean master, and then earlier this year in April beat this J, this Chinese master, and everyone really was impressed by this. But the recent development is that the DeepMind researchers started over, and they just basically programmed the rules of the game of Go, and then had the computer just start playing games against itself. The first iterations, it was just sort of randomly scattering pieces around the board, playing very, very poorly. Within a day or two, it had advanced to the point of a good human player. And after 3 days, the program defeated the earlier program, which had defeated Key G 100 games to 0. And then they let it run, and they said they had a system where they rated it using the same rating scheme that they rate human players. And after 40 days, this program had an ELO rating of over 5,000 compared to like the Key G's rating, which was 3661. So they said, by comparison, the new AlphaGo 0 program is as far ahead of Key G as Key G is ahead of a good amateur. So to me, this is really remarkable. And here's an example of a program learning without human input, other than just programming the rules of Go and letting it at. It's really a remarkable result. And I think it has real application for a wide range of AI applications, including finance. Again, just a week or two ago, an article came out in Bloomberg. It was a feature article on AI, emerging AI applications in finance. And it says, the fraternity of bond jockeys, derivatives, mavens, and stock pickers who've long personified the industry are giving way to algorithms and soon artificial intelligence. Goes on to say the tools will relieve staff of routine tasks and offer an edge to those who stay in the field. He said, but one day the machines may not need much help. And so this was written, a lot of the focus of the article was on how many different areas different parts of the finance world whose jobs are threatened. And here are just a few of the ones that they mentioned. The credit markets, automating subjective decisions about bonds and bond sales, either way. Foreign exchange, trying to anticipate the variations in demand and prices based even on news events. Automatic reading of news stories as they come out on the wire is now quite an advanced art. Order executions. You've all heard of these games of stealth and anti-stealth, and companies installing fiber optic cables in a straight line so that they can shave off a few milliseconds to get their order through. Another one's interesting. Understanding legal documents and court rulings as how they relate to bond deals. And then finally, analyzing satellite images. I mean, everything from Chinese industrial sites to Walmart parking lots and during holiday seasons to see what's really happening in the economy, and can they use this to get even just a slight epsilon edge, because everything in the finance world is based on just a slight epsilon edge. If you can do just slightly better than the other competitors, you'll win. I think it was actually just yesterday, there was an interview with Jim Simons, who is this mathematician I mentioned earlier, who had gone on to found a very successful hedge fund. And he says the whole business nowadays is it's like a herd of galloping horses, and you've just got to stay one nose ahead, because there are a lot of other people doing the same things, the same intelligent software, the same algorithms and tricks, and pretty soon it's all canceled out. And so you've got to stay ahead. We mentioned about the hedge funds. It's sort of an open secret right now that most hedge funds have not done very well lately. How many have followed this at all? That I was just reading earlier, for the last 5 years running, the average index that follows all the top hedge funds, that index has been running like at 5%. Just a straight S&P 500 has been 13%. And so this continual, ongoing deficit between the average hedge fund performance and just the overall market averages, this has led a lot of players in the financial world to really question their hedge fund investments. I don't know if you heard, but the California Public Employee Retirement Fund, CalPERS, which is the largest public pension fund in the world, I believe, they've announced they're going to completely pull out of any hedge fund investments. The New York State Public Employees Union is their pension fund is also going to pull out of hedge funds. But very interestingly, the few that are making money, most of these are highly mathematical, quantitative funds. These are the ones that are making money, and I think this is really the wave of the future. But I want, at the risk of perhaps even being a little bit discordant to those of us that are here today, there's some real dangers ahead here. Supercomputers can generate nonsense faster than ever before. We've really got to be in a large, not just finance, but a large range of applications. We've really got to be careful with the details. Are the models realistic? And in particular, are the statistical methods we are using to test and measure the progress of these systems, are they really appropriate? And is there a sufficient raw data to justify the conclusions we are drawing from this data? And among other things, can other researchers reproduce this findings? Now, obviously, this is not something that we can, Google may not want to disclose exactly the techniques they are using to Apple, but an engineer or a software designer in Google ought to be able to provide enough details that some other software engineer in Google or the same organization can reproduce these findings, or we run the risk of just starting to generate a lot of scientific nonsense. Some of you are familiar, there's some real big reproducibility crises right now going on in a number of other fields. The biomedical field is really in a bad way right now. If any of you have followed the news, like a Bayer researcher set out to reproduce some pharma studies that prominent pharmaceutical studies in the literature were only able to reproduce 16 of 60 or 17 of 67. Cancer studies. There's this very interesting, a bunch of social scientists formed what they call the Reproducibility Project, which is based in Virginia. And they took on and looked at 100 major recent studies in psychology, and were only able to reproduce 39 of them. Even the Federal Reserve, some researchers set out to try to reproduce some studies in economics, and were able to reproduce less than half of them. And this is even the Federal Reserve study, even the researchers interacted with the authors of these, asked them for data, asked them for explanations, and even after several rounds of interaction, the bottom line is that they were able to reproduce fewer than half of the studies. So, finance world, I think, has its own type of crisis right now, particularly in the public eye. A lot of people, rightly or wrongly, believe that the Wall Street system is rigged against them, and was good part responsible for the big financial crash of 2008 and 09. Many people from all walks of life are confused with these thousands of different investment funds and programs and services available. We've all heard financial forecasts, and people are starting to get kind of skeptical of these. Also, the financial news, anyone, if you have opened financial news, whether it be online or print sources, there are lots of charts and pseudo-mathematical jargon, Fibonacci ratios, parabolic SARs. And I sat down with a financial colleague. We went through some of this, and near as we can tell, this is all bogus. Anyway, so here's the question is, before we start pointing finger, you start pointing a finger, and there's one finger going out, but there's 3 or 4 coming back. And so maybe we should ensure that our own published research is mathematically and statistically sound before we start pointing too many fingers. Anyway, I mentioned how, again, I was sort of trained as a mathematician and sort of came into the finance maybe 10 years ago. I worked with a colleague, a rather prominent financial mathematicians in New York City. And one day after, again, this is after several years of collaborating with him on some various studies, I sat down and I wrote kind of a long-winded email to him, and I said, you know, one thing that's always puzzled me about the financial world, and I cited several examples, both from media news, financial news reports, and also from some peer-reviewed articles in the field, scientific articles. And he said, you know, is it just me? It just seems to me that some of this just can't be true. For one thing, from what I have seen in working in other fields of science and all the supercomputing and climate modeling and many of these other applications, it just seems to me that the sort of analysis they're doing is pretty is kind of trivial at best and questionable. And then when a lot of these people say, just based on eyeballing charts, that they know where the stock market is going, I said, oh really, you know, here we have supercomputers and some of the brightest mathematicians and physicists and other disciplines combing all the market data for wiggling every little bit of signal that they can. And there's something that they've missed that a human just eyeballing a chart could pick up. No, this doesn't make any sense. And so anyway, I said, so why doesn't someone blow a whistle on this? Am I missing something? Am I the only one here? And anyway, he didn't respond, and in fact, a few days later, I kind of felt embarrassed about it. I thought, okay, this guy got a sort of a strange, long-winded email from a colleague of his, and he shrugged it off, and oh, okay, yeah. But about a week or two later, he did respond, and he says, no, Dave, it's not a dumb question at all. He said, it's a question that I have struggled with, and which answer makes me an unhappy man. He says, the truth is most people in this industry are charlatans. They are not scientists. He says, I completely agree with your assessment. The amount of nonsense in the field is incredible. And so, anyway, we discussed this some more and actually decided to do something about it. And so we organized a little group, which was provocatively called Mathematicians Against Fraudulent Financial and Investment Advice, MAFIA for short. And we thought, we're going to do more than just poke fun. So we've written a series of articles and studies, and where we're one by one showing how different sectors are going wrong. And the biggest theme here is the people are drawing conclusions that are not statistically sound. And in the finance world, this is called backtest overfitting. It means, or a backtest meaning you're testing some model based on historical market data. Overfitting means statistical overfitting of that market data. And there are several ways this can happen. You can propose a theoretical model which, with all of its little tuning knobs, really encompasses more information than the amount of data you're feeding to it. Or you may have some proposed new financial investment strategy, and then you set a computer loose to optimize over a huge space of parameter variations, or doing an optimal search technique to find the optimal solution, where in this means you configure a variation of your strategy that gives the best score on the historical market data you're using. And then the third is that you construct some investment fund, say like a a weighted combination of S&P 500 stocks. And, but then again, you use some computer scheme to explore over the space of all possible weighting factors to find a maximum point. And then that's the one that you market. But the trouble is, when a computer can analyze over many thousands, millions, or even billions of variations on some fixed data set, and then you only present the best, it is almost certain that that will be statistically overfit and absolutely worthless. In fact, it may well, we actually show that it might even be inclined to lose money. So it may be worse than throwing darts at a dartboard. So for instance, again, this is based on one of our studies. How easy is it to overfit a backtest? If you have only 2 years of daily, say, stock market closing values as your data set, then you better not try more than 7 variations of your strategy or it'll be statistically overfit. And if you only have 5 years, you better not try more than 45. So obviously, if you're trying thousands and millions and billions, you are overfit. Absolutely certain, guaranteed, it's garbage. So anyway, here's just sort of a way to illustrate this from kind of a homey point of view. Let's suppose you're an unscrupulous financial advisor. And so one day you send out 5,120 letters to prospective clients with half predicting that some stock or some market index will go up and the other half predicting it'll go down. Obviously, you're going to be right on half of those. So to the half that you're right, you send out another letter making another prediction. Half of those will be right. You keep repeating this. After 10 iterations, the final 5 investors that come out of this experiment are just going to be astounded that you have sent them 10 consecutive spot-on predictions. Well, they might give their entire fortune to you to manage. Now, obviously, this is fallacious, absurd. In fact, it's really fraudulent. But why? What's the fallacy here? The problem is that all of those other investors were not told, or the final 5 in particular, were not told about the thousands of other letters you've sent out to making other predictions. So, but again, we can chuckle at this, but if you're a financial professional and you are promoting a statistically overfit fund or strategy, and you're not telling the prospective clients of all the thousands or millions of failed computer runs behind it, why is that any different? Why is that any less fraudulent and potentially harmful to the client? There have been a huge number of new stock funds, like new exchange-traded funds, been promoted lately. But literally hundreds of these are being minted every single year. And so that raises the question, well, how many of these really have any fundamental intelligence? And so someone actually did a study. That's the problem with doing kind of statistically questionable stuff, is that there are some few nasty people in this world that actually look at your record and actually do some calculations. And in this case, the study found that out of 370 new stock market indices that had been proposed, 87% of these outperformed the market averages up until the point that the fund was turned, or the index was turned into a fund and actually deployed. But only 51% did so afterward. And then these funds had an average return of 12% per year before the inception, but a minus 0.2% to 6% after. So draw your own conclusions. it's really clear that this has got statistical overfitting written all over it. Here's this little study we did. We wrote a computer program that would design a stock fund, actually consisting only of S&P 500 stocks, a weighted collection, that would meet any desired performance profile you wanted. You want just steady growth month after month, even during market turnout, we can give you one. But how does it do when it's given new data? How does it do when it's really put into action? Well, here's how it did. It looked really great, and then it crashed to zero. But notice, the orange and the blue line are really the same line up to here. It is perfectly matching our target profile up to the point where we stopped giving it test data. As soon as we started giving it new data, it's just as erratic can be and actually crashed to zero. Here's another one. Initially it went way up, great, but then it crashed down just as hard. It literally crashed to zero and was liquidated. So again, another study we did, can gurus forecast the market? This is, again, a lot of gurus, a lot of market forecasters are out there, some of them quite prominent, making forecasts. Well, there are some nasty people in this world, such as us, that actually keep track and actually log and analyze the records. And here's just one study here that someone found that going from covering some of these forecasters from 1999 to 2016, what they found is that the forecasters erred very badly during these two big recessions we've had recently. But then, as the guy mentions, these forecasts were least useful when they mattered the most. So what good is it? We did a study here, and this is basically our conclusion. Across all of the forecasters that we analyzed, average accuracy was 48%. Yes, that is less than 50%. You would get better results by throwing darts on a dartboard. And again, many of these people are using very sophisticated looking schemes, charts and statistics, and but in the end, it's not working. And so this is, if there's any caution that I can offer, not just in finance, but over a broad range of other AI applications, let's make sure we get our statistics right. Let's not make sure that we don't join the ranks of those that are generating scientific nonsense and in the end threatening to give the field a bad name. We have an obligation to the field to make sure that our methods are statistically and mathematically sound. And because problems are going to come, if there are problems out there that aren't addressed, they're going to come home to roost, and then the field is going to get a black eye. So this final comment here, one thing I commented to the colleague I mentioned, this good friend of mine that we have co-authored papers with, I said, you know, as I go around and talk and discuss with a lot of people in the field are kind of aware of this and aware of these problems. So I said, well, why aren't more people saying anything? And he said, yes, this is a really serious problem. The field has got to have some reckoning. In general, I think that this is a problem that is afflicting many fields of science. How many have heard of p-hacking, where people are essentially, they continue doing studies until they get a p-value of 0.95%, and then they publish it. And fudging and adjusting their figures here and there. We've mentioned about failing to disclose the number of models or variations, misusing statistical methods. Charts, misleading charts that are dressed up to make the results look a little bit better than they are. This has always been a problem in high-performance computing. Early in my career, I wrote a notorious paper saying misleading performance reporting in the high-performance computing field. And I stood up at a plenary lecture in the supercomputing conference, and I put up examples, and I named names, and showed charts that were taken from peer-reviewed scientific papers. When the talk was over, I left town. And again, I don't like doing this. I don't like the role of being a referee or a policeman, but more of us need to do this. More of us, when we see stuff that's going on in the field that is not sound, it's not statistically or scientifically sound, we need to speak up, because otherwise we're accomplices in these abuses. Thanks.